Hello, thanks for joining us for another book club meeting. We originally intended to talk about a couple of books that turned into 6 books, and now we want to make this a recurring series because, well, it's fun, and we think you could benefit from it. So, again, thank you for tuning in and listening to a couple dudes who love to read talk about stuff we love to read. And more importantly, how we actually apply it to our lives and our business, because education is probably the easiest form of procrastination, and you could constantly be learning new things. I just got to get one more thing in and then I'll be ready to go, and we're never really ready. There's always more to learn, and it could be a just debilitating excuse in the disguise of feeling productive. So part of this isn't just, I read this book and this is what I liked about it, but this is how I may have applied it. This is what I learned not to do with it. This is how we can encourage you to apply it to your own situation as well. So I'm excited. Nathan, thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me back. Thanks for letting me be on the other side of podcasts hosting, I guess. To actually be a guest is fun.
Yeah.
And good to kind of delve back into some of the content that I've read over the years. And like you said, actually not just talk about the content itself, but how I've actually been able to apply it and continuing to work at applying it in my life.
Yeah. So if you haven't already, go check out the Boca podcast. That is Nathan's baby over there. You can get it on YouTube or anywhere podcasts are available, right?
Literally. Yeah.
Yep. Yours truly was a guest on there not too long ago. And that's kind of what sparked these conversations. So you never know what happens when you jump on somebody's podcast. So why don't you start us out? What's your book?
I was going back through, and I don't know if I mentioned this in our previous conversation, but I'm a little nerdy in that I do book reports, and there's nothing fancy about the book reports that I write for the books that I read. Usually just some quick notes, a rating. Did we talk about the rating system last time?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I believe so.
Yeah. So seven or higher out of 10 is one that I would recommend to somebody. And so that's pretty straightforward. This particular book is called The Charisma Myth. And the subtitle is How Anyone Can Master the Art and Science of Personal Magnetism by Olivia Fox-Cabane. And I know we were talking about kind of the benefits, the pros and cons of business books versus self-help books. This is an interesting kind of combination of the both, in particular because of what has been a theme, something that I've continued to hear and see in the photography industry over the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, maybe even a little bit more. Photographers talk about being introverted or having tendencies toward introversion, where there is fear, some level of apprehension associated with engaging with people that they don't know, being on a podcast, speaking to a group of people. But there is that tendency toward introversion. And I've been very curious, and I don't have any real answers at this point. I've had plenty of conversations with photographers about what's behind that. But as I looked at my own life and saw the opportunity to continue to improve the impact that I have, or that I have the opportunity to make on people who I engage with, again, whether it's in a podcast or whether I'm presenting, but more specifically and certainly in person, one-on-one conversation, I knew I had some work to do. And I had the opportunity to pick up this book. And there were 3 components of this idea of charisma that became so impactful for me. I actually made it part of my overall value list. I have 12 values that I strive to live out as consistently as possible. And charisma became one of those values that I added. And I was able to use the way that Olivia defines charisma as a way to define charisma in my life. And of course, make it front of mind, something that I work at on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Photographers, it's introversion, extroversion, whatever they may be, like we have to get over that as business owners and like push through, find ways to make these systems work for ourselves. And it's not just public speaking, because even if you're like, I'm never going to get in front of a room full of people and teach about photography, it's the anxiety of jumping on the telephone for a phone consult with somebody. It's doing in-person sales with somebody and guiding them through the process while you may be terrified that they're going to not like the photos and that you're a terrible photographer, which is totally up here. So many different ways that this interaction or this type of interaction occurs in what we do that isn't just being on stage with a microphone. So how how have you applied that, or what are the 3 points that have struck with you?
Well, and I have to respond first to what you said, which is so true. I realize it's a relatively small percentage of people that are going to be on stage or even hosting a podcast or even being interviewed in a podcast.
Yeah.
That's not the norm, and I get that. Where I've certainly found the most benefit for myself is in those individual conversations. And that's why it becomes highly relevant for any photography business owner, because at the end of the day, while we may spend a lot of our time online and in virtual environments, we are going to be engaging with potential clients or actual clients individually in person, whether we're meeting with them or we're photographing them, or a combination of both. So the 3 components that Olivia kind of goes into detail about in the book are, and I'll kind of share some definitions for each of these, but presence, power, and warmth are those 3 components. And the way that I understood presence, as she defines it in the book, is, actually I should say the notes that I put here, because again, I'm kind of note taking for the purpose of these book reports. I said, it's obvious to someone else when you're not fully present. Be aware. So aware of our surroundings, certainly aware of what's going on in front of us, deliberate, and engaged. And the first and I guess most obvious way that certainly I can fall short in this regard, and I've certainly seen it all around me, is when it comes to this crazy thing, which, and I'm holding up a phone for anybody who's not watching video. It's so easy to get distracted by that when we always have it around us. And the thing that drives me even more crazy, honestly, is Apple Watches. People put those watches on under the guise of like, I don't have to pick up my phone, but then you constantly see them twisting their wrist and looking at their whatever notification is popping up on the wrist. It's not only distracting, but from my perspective, and I'm a little bit old school, I guess, but I think it's super disrespectful. The person's in front of you talking and you're constantly looking at that thing, whatever the screen is. And it certainly takes away from the potential quality of the conversation and certainly your ability to be present. In some ways, this is an obvious thing that we should all be practicing, but it was good to have that reminder. And even if we don't have a device in front of us, the intention to actually not just be looking at this person, but mentally, emotionally be right there with that person, to actually be present with them in a super deliberate way, that was really impactful to me. The second component, she talks about the idea of power. And again, I kind of summed up in these notes the way I understood it from her book, but maintain comfortable yet assertive body language and dominance in intelligence or knowledge and abilities. And we're not talking about, being some weird egomaniac coming to take over the conversation, take over the room. At least that's not how I understood this. But again, when we think about photographers' tendency, and certainly my tendency in various aspects of my life, to have some level of insecurity or apprehension in the presence of somebody else or a group of people, this idea of having some level of confidence in ourselves and our abilities is important. And to actually have that confidence, do you follow Alex Hormozy at all, Mike?
Yeah.
And I was listening to some of his content over the last few days, and he talked about this. People feel unsure of themselves. And rather than standing up and saying mantras in front of a mirror or these kind of reassurances, if you will, these vocal reassurances, go do the thing. Whatever the thing is that you're afraid of, over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where you just naturally have a confidence. You're comfortable doing that particular thing because of actually doing it and doing it a million times over. When it comes to podcast hosting, presentations to groups, and even conversations with my kids or my girlfriend, I literally, behind the scenes, it may sound or look kind of funny if somebody saw me, but I practice conversation on an ongoing basis. I think about the words that I'm using. I think about the way, the tone of voice that I'm using, how this may come across to the other person, the way the ideas flow. Am I using too many words to convey an idea? Can I simplify it further? But I've not just been podcast hosting for 6+ years. I actively practice conversation behind the scenes. In fact, I did a little bit of preparation for our conversation today as well. And literally, I'm in my apartment. I'm talking out loud. I'm thinking through and ultimately vocalizing how I might approach the conversation so that the end consumer has a good experience on the other side of me. So I'm not just going to show up and feel comfortable or confident or bring that level of power because I am confident in my ability, my intelligence, my knowledge, my understanding, my ability in let's say in the realm of conversation, just naturally, I have to actually go do the thing. And so to have that kind of power, we have to go practice it regularly. And that's the encouragement that I would give to listeners. And then the third component was warmth.
Let me chime in on that second one before we move on. This is one of the things I say all the time. And it was funny, like someone told me this quote the other day that they had heard, and I'm like, that's my quote. I'm glad it's circulating. Confidence comes from, courage before confidence. And so confidence is our ability to predict an outcome, whatever it may be. And oftentimes we go into situations with no idea what's actually going to happen. This could be the first time you ask someone out on a date, or do an IPS session, or photograph, I don't know, a family of 12 when you've never photographed more than 4 people before. Whatever it may be, you don't know the outcome. And so you go into it, there's the nervousness, apprehension, the fear. But once you've done that a handful of times, you're like, well, no one dies. I'm still in business. I took great photos. They were happy. I made money. So now I have a better idea of what's going to happen next time. And that's where the confidence comes from. We were courageous enough to try the thing without knowing what the outcome would be. And then we get better at predicting the outcome.
And I would even kind of push back on that a little bit, because when I do a live stream for my podcast, because all my episodes are live streamed now. So the reality is I don't actually know the outcome for that particular situation. So I would have taken a step further and say that I'm confident in my ability to handle whatever that scenario is that I'm in, despite the fact that I can't actually predict the outcome. I don't know if somebody's internet connection is going to go out while I'm interviewing them. I don't know if my power is going to randomly go out because I have a storm nearby. But I'm just going to go with the flow best I can in those scenarios. But again, that level of comfort comes from repetition and intentional practice. And that is where that confidence comes from. People want to feel confident. And I keep hearing, conversations about, well, I'm going to go say this mantra, or I can't think of the word that they use.
Affirmations?
Affirmations. Thank you. Affirmations in front of a mirror. They're going to say those over and over again. Sorry, there may be at least the beginnings of a shift in mindset by doing something like that. But at the end of the day, if you're not actually doing the thing, I could say over and over again, I'm an incredible basketball player, but the reality is I'm not. And that's not going to change unless I actually go put the work in. So I have to put the work in. And that enables me, after that level of repetition, to be able to kind of flex and flow with the situation, despite the fact that I can't actually predict every single outcome.
Totally. I do like affirmations personally. And to me, it's like when someone manifests something, you can't just like wish for it and have the thing magically appear. You have to actually do the work. So that's it. There's so much negative self-talk. I think that's the power of affirmations. You're replacing what you used to say, like with marketing. Instead of saying, well, I'm a terrible marketer, I don't know how to use Facebook ads. Well, I'm learning how to use Facebook ads. I'm becoming an amazing marketer. That sort of self-talk is where I think affirmations can come into play. But then you actually have to do the work, as you mentioned, to become a good marketer or improve your free throw statistics,
Well, but I get to push back, and I love this conversation. Yeah. What I think about, did you ever watch the show American Idol? It's actually still running, I think.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I know. I was kind of surprised too when I heard this the other day, but I think they may be on their last season at this point. But whether it's American Idol or some of the other kind of reality shows, performance-oriented shows, and the individual would get up on stage, they'd do the performance, and then the judges would give them negative feedback or some level of constructive criticism, and the person would respond back, well, no, but I know that I'm awesome. And anybody with half a brain and some level of musical background is listening to this performer, and we know they're objectively terrible, but in their mind, they're essentially affirming not only themselves for themselves, but doing so in front of other people. There's some level of balance that we have to find in that process of affirming ourselves, which is some level of objective feedback. In marketing, the numbers are going to tell us whether or not we're actually a good marketer at the end of the day. We may be putting the work in. We're confident in our ability to be able to learn how to continue to get better. But I'm not just going to say I'm an awesome marketer because I don't have the objective proof that is the case. So maybe it's kind of a both and scenario here. Yes, absolutely, because I'm guilty of that negative self-talk to an extreme in some cases. So we shift the narrative internally, but then also be willing to put the work in until we have the objective results that we're looking for in that.
Totally. Are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I'm not. No.
So this is the example you just gave from American Idol, where people are so terrible at things, but think they're, or like truly believe that they're absolutely an expert
Yeah.
in it. Where it's like delusion.
Yes.
And in the Photogs Unite podcast, my last show, I brought on a psychologist to talk about stuff like that, because I'm like, do I have this? Am I just so confident in what I'm doing with no actual ability to execute any of the things I'm doing?
Yeah.
And she's like, firstly, if you're even considering that may be an option, probably don't have it. Just the awareness or the humility, but there's definitely an extreme to it.
Yeah. Well, it can be easy. And again, speaking for personal experience, it can be easy when whatever the thing is that you're working on doesn't play out well. The numbers are down, the performance gets negative feedback, whatever the scenario.
Yeah.
It can be very easy then to begin to question yourself. And, therein lies the benefit of not only developing a certain level of honest self-awareness, but also being willing to get feedback from outside sources, kind of like you're describing, to make sure to keep somewhat of a balance in that kind of review of where you're at the moment, and then how that can be improved without beating yourself up so much that you just kind of burn out altogether.
Yeah. So what's point number 3?
Number 3, so we got presence, we have power.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it sounds so simple. And I think this is a great opportunity to differentiate simple and easy. 'Cause, I mean, it's just 3 things. And it totally makes sense if you look at any charismatic leader who's ever, I don't know, taken center stage literally or figuratively, like politicians or, I don't know, any kind of public figure. It's like they have this confidence when they come out to speak. They make people feel welcome, because if you don't allow people to feel welcome from that warmth, then no one's going to follow. No one's going to pay attention if they don't believe that you actually care.
And I would say that the confidence can come off as egotistical if it's not coupled with that warmth. Because we all know, and I mean, it just, even thinking about it, it kind of grates on my nerves right now, but we all know what it sounds like to hear a literal or figurative politician, right? Somebody who is putting on a face for whatever the occasion. You can literally hear that in the tone of that person's voice. You might see that their eyes are kind of dead simultaneously as well. They're throwing some level of energy in, but their eyes are dead, and there's no warmth to their tone of voice.
Right.
So confidence is one thing, but coupling that with a warmth, which would suggest a genuine interest in adding value or a genuine interest in actually connecting with the person on the other side of that individual conversation, I think that's where the benefit lies here. And then like the end of that definition makes the other person feel interesting. I think about a conversation, multiple conversations I had with a guy here locally. His name is Todd, who I don't think we talked about Todd last time, did we?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure I'm not repeating myself. I talk about Todd quite a bit because it was so impactful in my life. Todd was not even a photographer. He was the husband of a local photographer, and he would come to these networking meetings, photographer networking meetings. He would sit on the other side of me at a dinner and just ask question after question after question. But again, that can be done robotically. He did it in a way that showed genuine interest because he'd ask a first question with a tone of voice, engaged, looking at me, that showed interest, but then the follow-up question and then the follow-up question after that showed that he was actually paying attention, not just because, again, the tone of his voice and the level of engagement here physically with me, leaning in, etc., but because he was asking relevant questions that actually dug into more detail.
Yeah.
I walk away from a conversation like that feeling like $1,000,000 and like I'm the most important guy in the world because of the way that he was engaging. It doesn't even, you walk away, I know from personal experience, trying to do that same thing, you feel a bit of energy drain from doing that because it does take that intentional effort. But my word, the impact that you have on individuals' lives as a result of having cared enough to make that effort is just incredible. And we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person and think about that and think about the opportunity that we have to impact them in that way. And I think it's so cool that we can do that.
Totally. I mean, you and I experience that all the time whenever we're on somebody else's show or we have I don't know. I can't tell you how many podcasts or YouTube interviews that I've been on where they send me the list of questions first.
Yeah.
And it's basically we're just reading everything out loud and that's the show. I'm like, this could have been an email. Why are we even having this This isn't even a conversation.
Yeah.
This is you pretending that you're asking me an engaging question. You already know what my answer is. And it just sounds disingenuous. It feels disingenuous. And like, I don't even want to be on that show. So that's one of the reasons I don't do structured episodes with scripts here. We don't need to.
And in most cases, I kind of envy you and admire you both because I did try the less structured approach with some guests early on in my podcast because I'm like you. I like to be able to have more organic conversation. The last thing that I want to do is have robotic conversation. But I also wanted to make sure that I was adding value. So how do I do that when I'm having guests on who are most of the time, and this was very intentional, not industry quote unquote celebrities that had experience teaching, speaking, being on podcasts.
Yep.
How could I make sure that we certainly could have a good conversation that was genuine, but also make sure that it was structured enough that people are like, aren't like, what are they talking about? Like, I don't even know where this conversation is going. And then what did I actually learn from that, if anything? Right. I had to figure out some level of balance. So what I tell my guests beforehand, because I do send them a list of questions, is that these questions give us some level of direction to go in the conversation. It helps with flow in the end listener experience. The last thing that I want is for this to be robotic in nature. So don't be hesitant. We can follow some tangents. The way that we're talking right now, this is how we're going to talk when we go live. This is not some overly canned production. That's the last thing that we want, certainly when it comes to conversation.
Yeah. And this is how we talk to our clients during photo shoots.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I require hair and makeup during my sessions because I want that time to sit there and speak with my client. We've already had a great phone consultation where I've really dug deep into who they are. But this is a chance for us to sit face to face and actually talk and allow them to feel like the most important person in the room and like everything they do matters, even if they don't think any of those parts of themselves are significant. And there is a huge difference in the quality of photos because of their comfort level and their confidence level. And we've just spent an hour and a half validating everything about them. And then I showed them the back of the camera from one of the first photos. And they're like, wow, I can do this. This is my time to shine. Yeah. And it works. And as you said, it is draining. I do 2 sessions in a day. I'm wiped from just giving all that energy and focusing so hard. And then I just have a glass of wine and stare into space for the rest of the day.
Yep. Oh, I absolutely feel you. Yeah. But I don't know. Like, I don't want to go through life just kind of focused. I mean, it seems like an obvious thing to say, but I don't want to go through life just kind of focused on myself and making myself comfortable in the moment. If I have the opportunity to impact people's lives, and they've been few, unfortunately, and far between, but I've had certain interactions with people where I felt like $1,000,000. So if I have the opportunity, even a small way, to impact somebody else's life, okay, I'm going to feel a little bit tired afterwards. A lot of people would just write that off to being introverted, and so they wouldn't go that direction. What if we actually made the choice to push beyond that little bit of discomfort, and we actually cared enough to impact somebody else's life, enough ultimately to work on applying these principles that we're talking about here? We've all been on the other side of somebody who actually cared enough, and we know how good that feels. Let's actually make the effort to add that same value to other people's lives, and certainly in the context of our business.
Yeah, and law of reciprocity. Mm-hmm. We're going to give it right back without you having to ask for it. So it's not transactional, right, but you're going to get everything back.
Yep.
And if you don't, you're not going to keep in your life anymore. It's a win either way.
Exactly that. No, absolutely.
Well, do you have any other final thoughts on this book, or ways that we can get on it right now?
Honestly, the only thing I would encourage is what you already said, Mike, which is go apply it, right? It's one thing for us to hear something, say, oh, that's a really nice idea. It's another thing to actually go do it. And just looking for opportunities. The way that I do this personally and practically is that I review, call it 5 times a week at least, I review that list of 12 values that I alluded to earlier, one of them being charisma, and I define it. In fact, I'll read this out the way that I define it on that list of values. It's anytime I'm engaging with people in a spirit of presence, power, and warmth. And of course, we define what those means practically. Maybe it means something a little bit different for those listening in or watching. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if we keep that idea front of mind and then look for opportunities, even in small ways, to practice that, it could be something as simple as going through the Walmart checkout line, and you see the name on that person's tag, and you literally call them by name and saying, how's your day going? The response, and it's so fun to do, by the way, the response that you get from people in that case, because they're just not used to people actually caring enough to engage in a conversation like that, even as simple as it is. Yeah. It's so cool. So look for those little opportunities, keep the principles front of mind, and look for little opportunities to practice it. That's where you're going to see a lot of benefit from this.
Love it. Well, Nathan, as predicted, this one went from, being half an episode to a full episode. So I'm so glad we got to spend this whole half hour chatting about your book. And we're going to do a part 4 coming up, which was going to be the part 2 of this one. So if that wasn't confusing for everyone listening, this is the end of part 3. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Nathan, for keeping these conversations going with me.
Oh, no, totally my privilege. Thanks for letting me share.